morning that seemed perfectly ordinary on the trading floor. The electronic screen still blinked with flickers of red and green. The familiar sounds of typing, ringing phones, and rustling papers filled the room. But all it took was a single line of news, just a few words about a new tax rate, and the whole room froze for a few seconds. That silence was heavier than any roar or commotion, because everyone understood that behind that short headline was a shockwave poised to ripple across the entire North American economy. To outsiders, it was just a policy announcement, but to the business world, it was like a direct hit to the heartbeat of the market. The United States and Canada, two nations deeply intertwined by trillions of dollars in annual trade, immediately felt the tremors. Trucks kept rolling down cross-border highways, steel plants, auto factories, and farms kept their lights on, but beneath that calm surface was chaos. Production plans unraveling, cost projections thrown into disarray. One decision out of Washington was enough to force thousands of businesses to pivot in a single day. Contracts were reviewed, delivery schedules adjusted, even entire supply chains stood on the edge of grinding to a halt. The steelworker, the farmer on the plains, the warehouse owner on the outskirts of town, they all felt the weight of that shock in their own way. To them, tariffs weren't some abstract concept. They showed up in utility bills, in the family budget, on the dinner table. A slight uptick in material costs, a cut in wages, longer shifts, any of those could throw daily life into turmoil. More importantly, this wasn't just about prices rising at the border. It was a stress test for the entire system, a test of endurance, patience, and the grit to weather uncertainty. Financial markets trembled, news outlets pumped out round-the-clock commentary, and experts clashed in heated debate. But for those truly embedded in the engine of production, the ones with no say in the decisions, only the responsibility to adapt, the quiet worry ran deeper. A policy might be reversed, a speech may fade from the headlines, but the impact on their jobs and income lingers far longer. And it's precisely at this point that we begin to see tariffs aren't just cold numbers on a spreadsheet. They're like a power dial that can regulate the very breath of an entire economy. When the US decides to turn that dial up, the whole region is forced to adjust its rhythm. And that brings us to the next chapter, where tariffs become political tools, levers that can protect, pressure, open doors, or slam them shut across the negotiating table. Tariffs might sound like nothing more than dry numbers in a ledger, but in reality, they're more like a volume knob placed right at the center of an economic symphony. Just a slight turn and the sound of the entire hall changes. Washington holds that knob in its hand, and every time it turns it up, the message being sent isn't just increase government revenue. It could be a nudge to a partner to change their behavior, a signal to protect a struggling domestic industry, or the opening move in an international negotiation. But like any musical instrument, turning the knob too far can easily turn harmony into dissonance. For American politicians, tariffs are a way to flex muscle, to send a strong message to voters that they're defending domestic jobs. Yet for businesses, every adjustment in tariff rates scrambles the cost sheet, forces contracts to be rewritten and production plans to be reworked. An auto assembly line could face shutdown just because component prices went up a few percentage points. And for the average consumer, they don't see the tense meetings in trade offices, but they feel it instantly when grocery bills spike or when building a new home suddenly costs more due to rising steel and lumber prices. That knob, then, doesn't just echo through the halls of politics. It resonates in every kitchen and factory. It's a lever of power for governments, but also a financial burden for businesses and a daily worry for working families. More importantly, unlike long-term policies that take time to show results, tariffs make their impact felt almost instantly. A decree signed in the morning can translate into higher costs by the afternoon, and by the next day, entire companies may be forced to shift direction. It's precisely because of this immediacy and weight that tariffs are a double-edged sword. Used wisely as part of a broader strategy, they can pave the way for agreements. But wielded carelessly, they can slam shut diplomatic doors. The power may rest with the one who turns the dial, but the ripple effects spread everywhere, from top-level decision makers all the way down to the factory floor worker. So when the US chooses to turn that knob hard, How does Canada respond? Not with loud protests or hasty countermeasures. Instead, Ottawa takes a different approach, maintaining a steady breath through the storm, quietly building barriers to keep the economy from being swept away. While Washington often chooses strength, urgency, and noise with every decision, Ottawa follows a different path. Gentler, slower, but no less resolute. When news of new U.S. tariffs sends markets into a frenzy, the Canadian government doesn't rush to respond with fiery rhetoric. They understand that reacting in anger only makes the waves crash harder. Instead, Ottawa chooses to act like a boatman navigating a river in flood season, unable to stop the current, but capable of holding the oars steady and finding calm waters to keep the boat afloat. Canada's top priority isn't tit-for-tat retaliation. It's keeping the flow of goods moving. For an economy that relies heavily on imports and exports, especially with its massive neighbor to the south, a traffic jam in trade is like being suffocated. The government immediately coordinates with industry associations to map out the risks, which goods are most sensitive, which clients are most vulnerable, which orders need rerouting. Rather than shouting slogans, they focus on concrete actions, from urgently helping small businesses find new partners to fast-tracking credit packages that help factories stay in operation. At the same time, Canada places strong emphasis on its people. Workers who temporarily lose their jobs aren't left behind. They're offered retraining programs to prepare them for new roles as companies restructure. Support initiatives serve as life rafts, ensuring that workers don't drown in despair amid the storm. The financial markets are calmed by composed, clear messaging that assures everyone the ship has a steady hand at the helm. This approach doesn't make for flashy headlines, but it yields a long-lasting result: trust. In times of uncertainty, people and businesses don't need lofty promises. They need to know the system around them is still working, that their government is present and engaged. This is the politics of stability, a force that rarely shines in the spotlight, but quietly holds up an entire community through the storm. And yet, Canada's calmness is only one side of the story. On the other side of the border, Washington views tariffs through a completely different lens, not just as a tool of economic management, but as a powerful weapon of negotiation. And it's in this contrast that we begin to see how the U.S. turns tariffs into a political lever, one aimed not only at the world, but also turned inward to reinforce domestic power. For the United States, tariffs have long been more than just an economic tool. They function more like a dagger laid on the negotiating table, both a warning and a weapon ready to be drawn if the other side refuses to yield. Every increase in tariff rates sends a political message, not just to the outside world, but directly inward, to the tens of millions of voters closely watching each move the administration makes. Supporters argue that short-term pain is necessary to protect domestic industries and reclaim fairness from deals seen as disadvantageous. Critics, however, warn that it's the very farmers, factory workers, and middle-class families, the ones promised protection, who may end up suffering first as costs rise, export contracts stall, and consumer prices surge. In the eyes of the U.S. government, tariffs are a move in a much larger game of chess. When placed wisely, they can open pathways, forcing adversaries to the table, offering small concessions in exchange for broader stability. But used recklessly or without strategy, they become walls, shutting down dialogue, slamming doors that were once slightly ajar. And in an era of deep internal division in American politics, tariffs take on yet another role, a tool for shoring up political capital. They're a card every administration is eager to play to show voters that they're tough enough, resolute enough to defend national interests. Still, the power of tariffs doesn't just reside in the meeting rooms of the White House or the halls of Congress. It ripples outward to the manufacturing plants of the Midwest, the vast fields of Nebraska, and the bustling ports along the Atlantic coast. A single tariff hike might offer leverage at the negotiation table, but it can also force a small business to lay off workers or compel a large factory to pause production because the cost of imported components suddenly overshoots projections. This duality between national strategy and the everyday worries of ordinary citizens is what makes tariffs such a double-edged sword. Hard to wield, but impossible to ignore. And when we take a closer look at the North American economy, the ripple effects come into full view. What seems like just a number on a financial chart can bring an entire production line to a standstill, all because a single part is delayed or a minor component becomes unexpectedly expensive. That's when it hits home. This economy runs like a finely tuned machine, but one so synchronized that even a missing screw can bring the whole system to a halt. The North American economy has long been praised as a smoothly running machine, millions of tiny components syncing together in a vast industrial symphony. Every car, every food package, every aluminum can is the product of countless cross-border journeys. A bundle of wiring might be manufactured in Ontario, shipped to Michigan for assembly, then sent down to Mexico for finishing before being exported to Europe. Components don't just cross borders once, they flow back and forth like blood circulating through the veins of a living system. But that same complexity and interdependence also make the system alarmingly fragile. When tariffs are suddenly imposed, it's not just one product that gets more expensive. The entire network begins to wobble. A tiny screw, a microchip, or even a seemingly insignificant aluminum can lid can become a choke point. In the just-in-time manufacturing model, factories keep minimal inventory. A single truck delayed at the border or one missing certificate of origin, and the whole line halts. Workers wait. Orders fall behind schedule. The auto industry offers the clearest example. A single car can contain over 30,000 parts, and if just one doesn't arrive on time, the whole vehicle is rendered useless. The same goes for agriculture. Seeds, fertilizers, and machinery are all vulnerable to tariff decisions, and a single delay can put an entire harvest at risk. Farmers can't afford to wait a month, just as factories can't afford to pause for a week. In this world, time is both money and survival. These disruptions aren't hypothetical. They've happened many times before. A shipment of electronic components gets stuck, and suddenly thousands of workers are idled. A container of aluminum can lids is hit with a surprise tariff, sending beverage production costs soaring and retail prices rising within days. These tiny, invisible details, once caught in a bottleneck, can grind an enormous system to a halt, like a clock missing just one gear. It's in these moments that a company's true resilience is tested. They can't afford to sit still and hope for luck. They must pivot. That means combing through customs paperwork to find tariff workarounds, or even redesigning entire supply chains to diversify sourcing. And it's this story of agile adaptation that unfolds in the next chapter, where businesses learn to survive through flexibility, ingenuity, and long-term vision. When the tariff storm hits, the first reflex for many businesses isn't to call a marketing meeting or draft a PR strategy. It's to get their customs broker on the line. In the world of modern trade, one correctly placed stamp or a properly certified origin document can save a company millions of dollars. Just a small tweak in the assembly process or relocating the finishing of a single component could shift goods into the fast lane under the USMCA agreement, dodging towering tariffs. Departments that once flew under the radar, like legal and import-export, suddenly find themselves on the front lines, poring over paperwork day and night, hunting for every legal loophole to keep goods flowing smoothly. But paperwork alone won't sustain a business. Relying solely on exemptions leaves companies vulnerable to political whims and last-minute policy shifts. That's why a quiet but powerful wave of transformation has taken place, from depending on a single supplier to diversifying sources, from trusting one golden partner to building a portfolio of safe options. Contracts are being rewritten with more flexible terms, and product designers are tasked with ensuring components can be swapped between multiple vendors. A car manufacturer might now sign deals with 3 chip makers at once, while a food company expands its farmer network across multiple regions. This isn't about predicting the future with precision. It's about preparing for every possible scenario. Flexibility has become a survival skill, and diversification is the shield that allows companies to stand firm when unpredictability strikes. It's often said that business is war, but in this era of globalization, it's also a delicate dance between risk and opportunity. The faster you pivot, the better your chances of staying in the game. Yet behind every supply chain restructuring, behind the thick binders of new contracts and detailed risk management strategies, lies something deeper: people. Because in the end, Every strategic blueprint ripples out to affect real lives, families and workers who bear the weight of these shifting tides. Behind the sensational headlines about tariffs, behind the tense meetings between politicians and business leaders are very real people, workers and their families. For a factory worker, a decision from Washington might mean pulling double shifts to meet rerouted orders, or the opposite, being sent home without pay because a supply chain has stalled while waiting on parts. A wheat, corn, or soybean farmer, long used to reading the skies for signs of rain, must now pick up a new habit, monitoring trade news to see if their next harvest will face price drops or export restrictions. In modest suburban homes or across sweeping farmlands, that uncertainty seeps into everyday life. A soft drink going up by a few cents, a car costing hundreds more, or a construction project delayed. All of it translates into concrete burdens for middle-class families already juggling tight budgets. A child might have to postpone tutoring plans because parents aren't sure if they can cover tuition next month. A family might hold off on buying a new house because their income no longer feels secure. For them, predictability isn't just an economic term. It's what allows them to dream, to plan, to move forward. Governments and corporations may roll out support programs, job retraining, temporary subsidies, clear and timely information to ease public concern. But that lingering anxiety still creeps in. Quietly, but persistently. Will the job still be there tomorrow? Will the paycheck come on time? Will the dinner table still feel like home? That weight doesn't show up in GDP charts or trade indexes. It's hidden in the quiet sigh after a long shift, in the worried glances exchanged by parents doing the family budget. And it's from this reality that we start to see a surprising paradox. The dramatic numbers that dominate media headlines, the kind that sound like inescapable nightmares, don't always reflect what's happening on the ground. Because between the announced tariff and the actual cost borne by businesses and families, there's often a sizable gap. And that gap is sometimes the key to understanding why some waves that seem overwhelming at first quietly fade sooner than expected. The biggest surprise in trade wars isn't always found in the headline numbers. It lies in the gap between the announced rate and the actual cost paid. When the media flashes bold red headlines about tariffs over 30%, it's easy for the public to picture a massive steel wall slammed down at the border. But reality is far more complex. Thanks to a web of origin rules and exemption clauses in the USMCA agreement, most businesses don't end up shouldering such towering rates. In fact, with the right paperwork, a few tweaks to the assembly process, or shifting a single production step, the final tariff might shrink to just a few percent. It's within that gap that the silent battle of business unfolds. Outsiders see the tension, but behind the scenes, legal teams, import-export departments, and logistics units are working around the clock. They're not just mapping out the routes of goods, they're mapping the trajectory of numbers. A rewritten contract, a rerouted shipment, a relocated manufacturing step, all with one aim: to optimize and reduce the real tariff burden to the lowest possible point. And it's that agility, not brute strength, that determines who stumbles and who survives. That's why many trade crises that seem explosive at first often deflate just as quickly. Not because political tensions suddenly ease, but because the economic landscape contains more technical exits than most people realize. Businesses know how to exploit legal loopholes. Governments, for their part, understand that escalation helps no one. In the end, technical finesse often has more power to calm a storm than political bluster ever could. Still, the more important question isn't about short-term workarounds. It's about the long game. How do we build a system resilient enough to stay steady the next time a tariff storm rolls in? From the short-term turbulence of tariffs, a long-term lesson gradually comes into focus. The true strength of an economy doesn't lie in how well it weathers a storm, but in how well it's prepared before the storm arrives. Any nation can assert its sovereignty and defend its interests, but if tariffs are the only shield, that strength is fragile at best. What's more sustainable is the ability to diversify supply chains, modernize transportation infrastructure, maintain a resilient domestic industry, and, above all, foster trust in laws and institutions. A modern seaport, a cross-border railway, an efficient logistics network, These do more than shorten the distance goods must travel. They also shorten the shadow of uncertainty. When the system runs smoothly, businesses gain room to maneuver, workers gain confidence in their jobs, and families feel secure enough to plan for the future. This kind of preparedness is like reinforcing the roof before rainy season. It may seem costly at first, but it's what keeps the house standing when the storm hits. The US and Canada, despite frequent clashes, still share a crucial anchor: a common legal playbook. Transparent dispute resolution mechanisms embedded in trade agreements serve as a quiet but powerful asset. A shared belief that when conflict arises, rules will be there to fall back on, preventing a slide into chaos. Policies may shift with election cycles, but when institutions are strong, both citizens and businesses can navigate the currents with greater confidence. Ultimately, the lesson isn't about avoiding the storm, it's about building a vessel strong enough to pass through it. And that becomes the foundation for the final part of this story, where we step back from the political noise and tune into the quiet rhythms of everyday life, Ines, to see who truly remains standing after all the turbulence. Every trade war begins with noise. Blazing headlines on screens, bold declarations echoing from political podiums, market panic as indexes tremble with every new announcement. The media shouts, the public speculates, and numbers are tossed around like they're the storm that will wipe everything away. But when the noise fades, what truly matters lies in the quiet rhythms. A shipment that arrives on time, an assembly line that keeps running, a supermarket shelf that never goes empty. These are the silent victories few notice, but they mean everything to businesses and families alike. The world will continue to shift. New numbers will emerge, and political decisions will stir up fresh waves. But in the end, what keeps an economy standing strong isn't tough talk. It's resilience, adaptability, and the steady strength of the entire system. The noise will pass. It's the quiet that shapes the future. If you found this analysis offered a new perspective, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay with us on this journey through stories of politics, economics, and everyday life, where even the smallest details can hold the biggest lessons. Your engagement and feedback are what keep us going, bringing you content that's both meaningful and grounded.